So this is the same process, but with a few more explanatory boxes. I think it works better for me to hang the various tools and techniques on. So in the first phase, we're going to analyse the opportunity. We want to really understand the thing that we're developing in terms of all the stakeholders who are involved in it. And next, we need to understand the user experience vision. So let's say we were thinking 5 or 10 years ahead. How do we imagine people using our system in the future? Now, we may not be able to achieve that right now, but at least we know where we're headed, so that if we have to make some kind of trade-off, we know whether we're getting closer or further from our goal. We also need to segment the market. So at a high level, just understand who are the main groups of user. And that helps us stop thinking in terms of just the user and instead think about specific users. We're now going to explore this in more depth when we move into building the context of use. We've already come across this term, context of use, from the ISO standard. And here, the aim is, first of all, to build some kind of user profiles. So we've got detailed understanding of who our users are. And this is where I'm going to talk specifically about personas, because personas are a great way for building those user profiles. And then we're going to talk about building environment profiles. This is the context that it's used in terms of the environment itself. So, for example, is the system going to be accessed mainly on a mobile device or a tablet device or a laptop? Also, what kind of lighting levels might be necessary for where the product is going to be used if it's a handheld device, for example. And then we're going to identify red routes. These are the key tasks, the absolutely critical things that people want to do with the system. Now, clearly people want to do a range of things with the system that you produce, but there's a handful of things they really, really, really want to do, the absolutely critical things. We need to identify those so we can make sure we prioritise them during design. We'll then move on to creating the user experience. We'll begin by talking about key performance indicators or usability metrics, which we'll use to steer the design and make sure that we think of usability as an objective, measurable attribute. We'll then talk about the information architecture. We'll talk about ways of making sure people can navigate the website or the system, whatever you produce, properly. We'll talk about ways of making sure we use the right kind of labels and terminology and understand the mental model that users have when they're using our system. And then we'll turn to looking at the interaction itself. This includes the screen layout, for example, so at least people don't vomit when they first launch our system. But it also includes things like, what do we know from eye tracking, for example, about where people look on screen? How do we expect people to interact with the system itself? How do we expect those controls to look and behave? And then we'll evaluate usability, and we're going to do that in two different ways. The first way is by thinking in terms of expert reviews. So we'll have usability experts, and you'll be one by the time you finish this course, using sets of principles, rules, or guidelines to say whether or not something's usable. But more importantly within that step, the gold standard is usability testing. We'll ask real users to use our system, and we'll find where the obstacles are in achieving their goals. And finally, the last step in our roadmap is to drop out and track real-world usage and continuously improve the system. So we obviously have got some assumptions that we've built during our design. We're going to be testing those assumptions and checking whether or not they're appropriate. If not, we'll feed back into the design and then fix it. Now, I quite like this model. Now, you'd expect that, of course, because it's from a book that I wrote. But the reason I like it is because it emphasises user experience design is a process. It's not just about requirements capture. Of course, you need to understand what customers want, but at the end of the day, a designer needs to create some kind of artifact. A designer needs to design something. But it's also not just about having a kind of pretty or engaging front end. And I've run into arguments with a number of design agencies in the past about this. Pretty design that doesn't meet business needs, it's a waste of time and money. It's also not just about testing. You'll find that some usability agencies get stuck on this and they just want to test everything to 95% significance levels. It's not about any of those individual components. It's about all of them. So user experience design is a design process. That's what we're going to be covering, and we're going to dive into that model beginning with the next lecture.